The Girl Fish. Once upon a time there lived, on the bank of a stream, a man and a woman who had a daughter. As she was an only child and very pretty besides, they never could make up their minds to punish her for her faults, or to teach her nice manners. And as for work, she laughed at her mother's face if she asked her to help cook dinner or to wash the plates. All the girl would do was to spend her days in dancing and playing with her friends, and for any use she was to her parents, they might as well have no daughter at all. However, one morning her mother looked so tired that even the selfish girl could not help seeing it, and asked if there was anything she was able to do so that her mother might rest a little. The good woman looked so surprised and grateful for this offer that the girl felt rather ashamed, and at the moment would have scrubbed down the house if she had been requested. But her mother only begged her to take the fishing net out to the bank of the river and mend some holes in it, as her father intended to go fishing that night. The girl took the net and worked so hard that soon there was not a hole to be found. She felt quite pleased with herself, though she had had plenty to amuse her, as everyone who passed by had stopped and had a chat with her. But by the time the sun was high overhead, she was just folding her net to carry it home again, when she heard a splash behind her, and looking round she saw a big fish jump into the air. Seizing the net in both hands, she flung it out into the water where the circles were spreading one behind another, and, more than by luck than skill, she drew out the fish. "Oh, you are a beauty!" she cried to herself. But the fish looked up to her and said, "You had better not kill me, or if you do, I will turn you into a fish yourself." The girl laughed contemptuously and ran straight to her mother. "Look what I've caught," she said gaily. "It is almost a pity to eat it, for it can talk, and it declares that if I kill it, it will turn me into a fish too." "Oh, put it back," implored the mother. "Perhaps it is skilled in magic, and I should die, and so would your father if anything should happen to you." "Oh, nonsense, mother! What power could a creature like that have over me? Besides, I am hungry, and if I don't have dinner soon, I shall be very cross." And off she went to gather some flowers to stick in her hair. About an hour later, the blowing of the horn told her that dinner was ready. "Didn't I say this fish would be delicious?" she cried, plunging her spoon into the dish. The girl helped herself to a large piece. But the instant it touched her mouth, a cold shiver ran through her. Her head seemed to flatten, and her eyes to look oddly around the corners. Her legs and her arms were stuck to her sides, and she gasped wildly for breath. With a mighty bound she sprang through the window and fell into the river, where she soon felt better, and was able to swim to the sea, which was close by. No sooner had she arrived there than the sight of her sad face attracted the notice of some of the other fish, and they pressed round her, begging her to tell them her story. "I'm not a fish at all," said the newcomer, swallowing a great deal of salt water as she spoke, for you cannot learn to be a proper fish all in one moment. "I'm not a fish at all, but a girl. At least I was a girl a few minutes ago, only—" She ducked her head under the waves so that they could not see her crying. "Only you did not believe the fish you caught had power to carry out his threat," said an old tunny. "Well, never mind. That has happened to all of us, and it is really not a bad life. Cheer up and come with us to see our queen, who lives in a palace that is much more beautiful than any of your queens can boast of." New Fish felt a little afraid taking such a journey, but as she was still more afraid of being left alone, she waved her tail in token of consent, and off they all set, hundreds of them together. The people on the rocks and in the ships that saw them pass said to each other, "Look what a splendid shoal!" and had no idea they were hastening to the queen's palace, but then dwellers on the land have so little notion of what goes on at the bottom of the sea. Certainly the little new fish had none. She had watched jellyfish and nautilus swimming a little way below the surface, and the beautiful colored seaweeds flowing, but that was all. Now, when she plunged deeper, her eyes fell upon strange things. Wedges of gold, great anchors, heaps of pearls, inestimable stones, unvalued jewels, all scattered in the bottom of the sea. Dead men's bones were there also, and long white creatures who had never seen the light, for they dwelt mostly in the clefts of rocks where the sun's rays could not come. At first our little fish felt as if she was blind also, but by and by she began to make out one object after another in the green dimness, and by the time she had swum for a few hours, all had become clear. "Here we are at last!" cried a big fish, going down into the deep valley, for the sea has its mountains and valleys just as much as on the land. "That is the palace of the Queen of the Fishes, and I think you must confess that the Emperor himself has nothing so fine." "It is indeed beautiful," gasped the little fish, who was very tired with trying to swim as fast as the rest, and beautiful beyond words as the palace was. The walls were made of pale pink coral, worn smooth by the waters, and round the windows were rows of pearls, and great doors were standing open, and a whole troop floated into the chamber of audience, where the queen, who was half a woman after all, was seated on a throne made of green and blue shell. "Who are you, and where do you come from?" she said to the little fish, whom the others had pushed to the front. In a low, trembling voice, the visitor told her story. "I was once a girl, too," answered the queen, when the fish had ended. "And my father was the king of a great country. My husband was found for me, and on my wedding day my mother placed her crown on my head and told me that as long as I wore it I should likewise be queen. For many months I was happy as a girl could be, especially when I had a little son to play with. But one morning, when I was walking in my gardens, there came a giant and snatched the crown from my head. Holding me fast, he told me that he intended to give the crown to his daughter, and to enchant my husband, the prince, so that he should not know the difference between the two of us. Since then, she has filled my place and has been queen in my stead. As for me, I was so miserable that I threw myself into the sea, and my ladies, who loved me, declared that they would die too. But instead of dying, some wizard who pitied my fate turned us all into fishes, though he allowed me to keep my face and body of a woman. And fished we must remain till someone brings me back to my crown again." "I will bring it back if you should tell me what to do," cried the little fish, who would have promised anything that was likely to carry her up to the earth again. And the queen answered, "Yes, I will tell you what to do." She sat silent for a moment, and then went on. "There is no danger if you will only follow my counsel. First, you must return to the earth and go up to the top of a high mountain where the giant has built his castle. You will find him sitting on the steps, weeping for his daughter, who has just died while the prince was away hunting. At the last she sent her father my crown by a faithful servant. But I warn you to be careful, for if he sees you, he may kill you. Therefore, I will give you the power to change yourself into any creature that may help you best. You have only to strike your forehead and call out its name." This time the journey to land seemed much shorter than before, and once the fish had reached the shore she struck her forehead sharply with her tail and cried, "Dear, come to me!" In a moment a small, slimy body disappeared, and in its place stood a beautiful beast with branching horns and slender legs, quivering with longing to be gone. Throwing back her head and snuffing the air, she broke into a run, leaping easily out of the rivers and the walls that stood in her way. It happened that the king's son had been hunting since daybreak, but had killed nothing, and when the deer crossed his path as he was resting under a tree, he was determined to have her. He flung himself on his horse and went like the wind, and as the prince often hunted the forest before, he knew all the shortcuts, and he at last came up with the panting beast. "By your favor, let me go. Do not kill me," said the deer, turning to the prince with tears in her eyes. "For I've run far and too much to do." As the prince, struck dumb with surprise, only looked at her, the deer cleared the next wall and was soon out of sight. "That can't really be a deer," thought the prince to himself, reining in his horse, and not attempting to follow her. "No deer ever has eyes like that. It must be an enchanted maiden, and I will marry her and no other." So, turning his horse's head, he rode slowly back to his palace. The deer reached the giant's castle quite out of breath, and her heart sank as she gazed at the tall, smooth walls which surrounded it. Then she plucked up her courage and cried, "Aunt, come to me!" And in a moment the branching horns and beautiful shape had vanished, and a tiny brown ant, invisible to all who did not look closely, was climbing the walls. It was wonderful how fast she went, that little creature. The wall must have appeared miles high in comparison to her own body, yet in less time than would have seemed possible she was over the top and down in the courtyard on the other side. Here she paused and considered what should best be done next, and looking about her she saw that one of the walls had a tall tree growing by it, and in the corner was a window very nearly on the level of the highest branches of the tree. "Monkey, come to me!" cried the ant, and before you could turn round, a monkey was swinging itself from the topmost branches into the room where the giant lay snoring. "Perhaps he will not be frightened at the sight of me that he might die of fear, and I shall never get the crown," thought the monkey. "I had better become something else." And she called softly, "Parrot, come to me!" Then a pink and gray parrot popped up to the giant, who by this time was stretching himself and giving yawns which shook the castle. The parrot waited a little until he was really awake, then said boldly that she had been sent to take away the crown, which was not his any longer, now that his daughter, the queen, was dead. On hearing these words, the giant leapt out of bed with an angry roar and sprang at the parrot in order to wring her neck with his great hands. But the bird was too quick for him, and flying behind his back, begged the giant to have patience, as her death would be of no use to him. "That is true," answered the giant, "but I am not so foolish as to give you the crown for nothing. Let me think what I will have in exchange." He scratched his huge head for several minutes, for giants' minds always move slowly. "Ah, yes, that will do," exclaimed the giant at last, his face brightening. "You shall have the crown if you bring me the collar of blue stones from the Arch of St. Martin in the great city." Now, when the parrot had been a girl, she had often heard of this wonderful arch and the precious stones and marbles that had been let into it. It sounded as if it would be a very hard thing to get away with from the building from which they formed part, but all had gone with her so far, and at any rate she could try. So she bowed to the giant and made her way back to the window where the giant could not see her. Then she called quickly, "Eagle, come to me!" Before she had even reached the tree, she felt herself borne up on strong winds, ready to carry her to the clouds if she so wished to go there, and seeming a mere speck in the sky, she swept along until she beheld the Arch of St. Martin far below, with the rays of the sun shining on it. Then she swooped down, and hiding herself behind a buttress so that she could not be detected from below, she set herself to dig out the nearest blue stones with her beak. It was even harder work than she had expected, but at last it was done, and hope rose in her heart. Next she drew the piece of string that had been found hanging from the tree, and sitting down in the rest, strung the strings together. When the necklace was finished, she hung it around her neck, and called, "Parrot, come to me!" And a little later, the pink and gray ferret stood before the giant. "Here's the necklace you asked for," said the parrot, and the eyes of the giant glistened as he took the heap of blue stones in his hand. But all for that, he was not minded to give up the crown. "They're hardly as blue as I expected," he grumbled, though the parrot knew well he did not know that he was speaking the truth. "So you must bring me something else in exchange for the crown you covet so much. If you fail, it will not only cost you the crown, but your life also." "What is it you want now?" asked the parrot, and the giant answered, "If I give you my crown, it must have another still more beautiful. This time you shall bring me a crown of stars." The parrot turned away, and as soon as she was outside, she murmured, "Toad, come to me." And sure enough, a toad she was, and off she set in search of a starry crown. She had not gone far before she came to a clear pool, on which the stars were reflected so brightly that they looked quite real to touch and handle. Stooping down, she filled a bag that was carrying with shining water, and, returning to the castle, wove a crown of the reflected stars. And then she cried out as before, "Parrot, come to me!" And in the shape of a parrot she entered the presence of the giant. "Here's the crown you asked for," said she, and this time the giant could not help crying out with admiration. He knew he was beaten, and still holding the chaplet of stars, he turned to the girl. "Your power is greater than mine. Take the crown. You have won it fairly." The parrot did not need to be told twice. Seizing the crown, she sprang out the window, crying, "Monkey, come to me!" And to a monkey that climbed down to the tree in the courtyard did not take half a minute. When she reached the ground again, she said, "Ant, come to me!" And the little ant at once began to crawl over the high wall. How glad the ant was to be out of the giant's castle, holding fast the crown, which had shrunk to almost nothing, as she herself had done, but grew quite big again when the ant exclaimed, "Dear, come to me!" Surely no deer ever ran so swiftly as that one. On and on she went, bounding over rivers and crashing through tangles until she reached the sea, where she cried for the last time, "Fish, come to me!" And plunging in, she swam along the bottom as far as the palace where the queen and all the fishes gathered waiting for her. The hours since she had arrived had gone very slowly, as they always do when people are waiting, and many of them had quite given up the hope. "I'm tired of staying here," grumbled a beautiful little creature whose colors changed with every moment of her body. "I want to go and see what is going on in the upper world. It must have been months since the fish went away." "It was a very difficult task, and the giant must certainly have killed her, or she would have been back long ago," remarked another. "The flies will be coming out now," murmured a third. "They will all be eaten up by a river fish. It is really too bad." And suddenly a voice was heard from behind. "Oh, look! It's that bright thing that is moving so swiftly towards us." And the queen started up and stood on her tail, so excited she was. A silence fell on the crowd, and even the grumblers held their peace and gazed like the rest. On and on came the fish, holding tightly a crown in her mouth. The others moved back to let her pass. She went right up to the queen, who bent and, taking the crown, tossed it on her head. Then a wonderful thing happened. Her tail dropped away, or rather it divided and grew into two legs, and a pair of the prettiest feet in the world, while her maidens, who were grouped around her, shed their scales and became girls again. They all turned and looked at each other first, and next the little fish who had regained her own shape and was more beautiful than any of them. "It is you who have given us back our life. You, they cried, and fell weeping from very joy. So they all went back to earth and the queen's palace, and quite forgot the one that lay under the sea. But they had been so long away that they found many changes. The prince, the queen's husband, had died some years since, and in his place was her son, who had grown up and was king. Even in his joy at seeing his mother again, an air of sadness clung to him, unless the queen could bear it no longer, and begged him to walk with her to the garden. Seated together in a bower of jessamine, where she had passed long hours as a bride, she took her son's hand and entreated him to tell her the cause of his sorrow. "For," said she, "if I can give you happiness, you shall have it." "It is no use," replied the prince. "Nobody can help me. I must bear it alone." "But at least let me share your grief," urged the queen. "No one can do that," he said. "I've fallen in love with what I can never marry, and I must get on as best as I can." "It may not be as impossible as you think," answered the queen. "At any rate, tell me." There was a silence between them for a moment. Then, turning away his head, the prince answered gently, "I have fallen in love with a beautiful deer." "Ah, if that is all!" exclaimed the queen joyfully, and she told him in broken words that, as he had guessed, it was no deer, but an enchanted maiden who had won back the crown and brought her home to her own people. "She is here in my palace," added the queen. "I will take you to her." And when the prince stood before the girl, who was no more beautiful than anything he'd ever dreamed of, he lost all his courage and stood with bent head before her. Then the maiden drew near, and her eyes, as she looked on him, were the eyes of the deer that day in the forest. She whispered softly, "By your favor, let me go, and do not kill me." And the prince remembered her words, and his heart was filled with happiness. And the queen, his mother, watched them and smiled.